The Fallout universe is home to many sad, strange, and outright terrifying stories. And it's one of those stories that I'm going to cover today in this video. A terribly tragic story about the vaquero mechanic of the Mojave Wasteland, Raul Tajeda. And so, without any more delay, let's just get into the video. The year is 2047 in the Fallout universe, 3 decades before the Great War that would end civilization, and it was during this year that Raul Tajeda would be born. During his youth, he lived just outside of Mexico City at Hidalgo Ranch, where he lived with quite a big family, including his parents, grandmother, 2 brothers and 3 sisters. We don't know very much about his youth, except for the fact that Raul found he had great skills, both tools as well as firearms, and it would be his skill with guns that would lead Raul to get into some trouble with the law. The trouble he would get himself into was never too serious, but it would mostly be down to his family to keep him in line during this time in his life. And sadly, this is nearly all of the information we have on Raul during the pre-war years. We wouldn't have any more information on him until the year 2077, a year when the culmination of the Sino-American War, where the 2 global superpowers, China and the United States, clashed repeatedly in a struggle to control the last remaining resources on Earth. A war that would lead to the events of the Great War on October 23rd, 2077, when the world was effectively destroyed due to the dropping of nuclear weapons, killing billions of people in the process of only 2 hours of repeated attacks on both sides. And when the Great War did break out in 2077, the United States was effectively destroyed, including the nearby Mexico City. Surprisingly, however, the Tajeda's family ranch was largely intact due to its distance from Mexico City. And although the ranch survived, a large number of refugees from Mexico City and other more heavily affected areas would prove to be a bit of a challenge to deal with. The Tajeda family did all they could to try and help these poor strangers who now found themselves without a home, providing as many people as they could with food and lodgings. This, however, would prove unsustainable when the Tajeda family began running out of enough food and lodgings to help the people. It was because of this that the Tajeda family began having to turn some of the people away from the ranch, and many of these people did not take this rejection kindly. With the refugees now becoming aggressive, Raul and his father had to begin to arm themselves in order to protect themselves while they turned away the hostile people from their ranch. And one night, after the Tajeda family had gone to sleep for the night, around 24 of these angry refugees would arrive at the family ranch, barring all exits and setting the family ranch house on fire. Thankfully, Raul could smell the smoke, which likely saved his life, and the only 2 people who managed to escape was Raul and his little sister, Rafaela, who escaped out of one of the house's windows. Sadly, the rest of Raul's family would pass away in the fire, including his parents, grandmother, 2 brothers, and his other 2 sisters. This, however, would not be the end of it, as the men who burned the house down would continue to pursue Raul and Rafaela in hopes of finishing them off. And on that day, Raul's gunslinging ability saved his life, as he managed to kill all of the men that came after him. He decided not to go after the rest of the group, as he now knew he had the responsibility to take care of his little sister, Rafaela, and not to get himself killed by risking his own life and avenging his family, regardless of how much he might have wanted to. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, it quickly became apparent to Raul that he and his sister could no longer stay at Hidalgo Ranch, as even with the family home gone, the men who came after him still wanted him dead. And not only that, they also went to the effort of putting a bounty on his head. He then decided that their best option was to head to Mexico City. Rafaela was understandably scared to leave, but Raul promised that if she came with him to Mexico City, he'd take her to go see the vaqueros, which if you didn't know, like I didn't know, it's just Spanish for cowboys. This promise was enough for Rafaela, who used to love the rodeo, and it also should be mentioned that neither of the 2 really understood what a thermonuclear bombing such as this meant for a city, and never mind how it would have affected their health. And so, in a desperate act, Raul and Rafaela headed to Mexico City. Upon reaching the city, any hopes of a better situation there were immediately shattered. Raul would later describe the city as a radioactive ruin. And it wasn't just the radiation that made the situation bad. The people of the city got by via looting and stealing, a way of life that the 2 Tajedas would also have to adapt to. The 2 would have to live a life of scavenging for food, medicine, and anything else that they would need for survival. And it was also around this time that Raul would sustain his initial radiation burns that Raul believes to be the very beginning of the process that would eventually turn him into a ghoul. Although the situation the 2 found themselves in was far less than ideal, there were still moments where Raul found some comfort in the whole thing. Like one day, when he was out scavenging for some bandages to wrap up his radiation burns, he stumbled upon a novelty costume shop, where inside he found an old vaquero outfit hanging on a rack, untouched. So, Raul took the costume off the rack and wore it back to where he was camping out. And when Rafaela saw him, she bursted out laughing for the very first time since the bombs had dropped. A moment Raul would remember for the rest of his life. And so, from that day on, Raul would continue to wear the vaquero outfit because of how it made his sister laugh. This would, however, cause him some problems. Due to his distinctive vaquero outfit and swift gunslinging ability, he quickly began to build up a legend around the city, earning himself the moniker of the Ghost of Mexico City, a name that gained the attention of some young gunslingers with chips on their shoulders, who would seek to kill him and gain all the glory that came with that. Raul, however, would continue to wear the costume because of how it made his sister laugh, and so the legend of the ghost of Mexico City would continue to grow, and it was around this time that Raul even began to entertain the idea that living a life there might be possible after all. That would be until one day, tragedy once again would strike the Tajeda family. One day, Rafaela would head out to scavenge for supplies by herself without the help of Raul, as he was deeply sick with what he thought was the beginnings of radiation poisoning. Rafaela would fail to return that evening, and so Raul would head out to try and find her. However, when he did find her, she had been killed by a gang of raiders who had been passing through the area. We don't know exactly what happened to Rafaela, as Raul wouldn't speak of it, but we do know that the only way Raul could identify poor Rafaela's body was by a scar that had been on her knee since she was just a little girl. Raul understandably felt an overwhelming feeling of guilt and loss. He became overcome with anger, and in an act of revenge, took his guns and tracked those raiders into the market. And with all the bullets he had left, he killed every last raider that he could find. And after Raul had exacted his revenge, he felt a deep sense of hopelessness. He wanted to be away from everyone, and so he would move on from Mexico City, where he and his sister tried to build a life together, heading back into the unknown, but this time without his little sister. After leaving Mexico City, Raul would wander for a long time, making it as far as the Gulf Coast, where he found an old and abandoned Petro Chico refinery. He would stay there for a while and do some thinking about his life, about his family and his old home, about his sister Rafaela. He thought about the guns that had become such a big part of his life, and the situation that living that way had gotten him in. And it was in that old Petro Chico refinery that Raul decided it was time to hang up his guns. He took off his vaquero outfit and put on a Petro Chico jumpsuit, deciding to leave his old life as the ghost of Mexico City behind him. He even went as far as dropping his name of Raul and instead taking up the name on the Petro Chico jumpsuit, Miguel. Raul, now going by Miguel, eventually made his way to Tucson, Arizona, which was now called Tucson by the local people. And although not a very important fact, the name Tucson greatly angered Raul. But other than that, however, he made do with his current situation, spending the next 75 years in Tucson, finding work as a repairman. And during all that time, keeping his guns stashed away as he had promised himself. It would be around this time, after 75 years in Tucson, that Raul would meet a prostitute by the name of Claudia, who worked at one of the local brothels. He took an immediate liking to her because of her striking resemblance to his dear sister Rafaela, and although, for obvious reasons, he never visited her, he took the time to look out for her and make sure she was always doing okay. The time that Raul spent in Arizona was spent around many raider tribes, as this was before Caesar's legion had pacified the region and nullified the raider threat in Arizona. And it was on one day that one of these raider parties would make their way into town. The tribe consisted of the leader Dirty Dave and his 6 brothers. They had come to town looking to buy some bullets. Raul sold them the bullets in hopes that the sooner they got their bullets, the sooner they would leave Tucson. This hope, however, would not be, as the men decided to stay in town for a little while and headed down to the brothel to take the edge off a little bit. We don't know exactly what happened while at the brothel, but it's likely that one of the men got too drunk. Regardless, the night ended in one of the men shooting and killing 4 of the prostitutes. Raul heard the screams of the girls and ran to get his guns, but sadly, by the time he got to the brothel, he found the 4 girls dead and found that they had taken Claudia away with them. So Raul, with his weapons, headed after Dirty Dave and his brothers. The gang had a head start on him, so Raul, with the fire in his belly, didn't sleep and kept on hiking through the nights in an effort to catch the men. It took him 3 days to finally catch up to them, and when Raul finally got there, he sadly found Claudia dead, with bullet holes in both of her eyes. And just like with what happened with Rafaela, he was immediately filled with rage and charged into the men's camp, killing 2 men before they even noticed he was there. The other 5 brothers managed to shoot him multiple times before Raul could get them too. Raul likely should have died after being shot that many times, but again, it was his anger that drove him on, and it was because of his anger that Raul eventually won. He just kept shooting until the last of Dirty Dave's gang was dead, and after defeating the men, Raul just laid on the ground, letting the sun bake him, with buzzards constantly trying to take a bite out of him. He laid there for a while, until eventually gaining the strength to get up and begin the long journey back to Tucson. A journey that took a battered and beaten Raul a very long time, and again this time, as he had done many times before, like in New Mexico, Raul decided sometime after he had healed up that it was time he moved on again, after 75 years of living in Tucson. And so, Raul began to head west. He travelled hundreds of miles before he eventually made it to the Mojave wasteland, where he settled down in a quiet area of the Mojave Desert just east of New Vegas and built himself a little shack there. A shack that he would call home for a time. He would spend his days in his shack listening to Black Mountain Radio. That was until one day, a day either before or during the year 2281, when the Black Mountain Radio broadcast went down. Raul then ventured up the nearby mountain to investigate what the problem might have been, and upon reaching the mountain, he was quickly captured by the state of Utopia, a group of first and second generation super mutants who were led by the mentally unstable Nightkin Tabitha. He was only able to save his own life by offering to fix the radio transmitter for Tabitha. However, after he completed his end of the bargain, Tabitha imprisoned him, keeping him as their repairman by force. He then had to remain there now spending most of his days repairing toasters for the super mutants, or repairing Tabitha's best friend and Mr. Handy robot called Rhonda. Rhonda had powered down in 2275, and while Raul was more than capable of fixing all of Rhonda's mechanical issues, he couldn't do anything with her programming. Tabitha was obviously not happy about this, which led to Raul's imprisonment becoming indefinite. That, however, would all change one day when a very special courier would stumble across the area and hear the static radio broadcast from Black Mountain. This begins the quest, Crazy Crazy Crazy. I'm going to skip over a good few of the details of this quest, as I don't feel a lot of it is necessary for the video and Raul's story in general, but there are only two real ways to complete this quest. The first is by heading to the storage building on top of the mountain and repairing Tabitha's long since shut down best friend Rhonda. Tabitha will then appear and thank the courier, and with that, turning all super mutant residents of the mountain peaceful. She will even allow the courier to release Raul from captivity without any sort of retaliation. The second is by not repairing Rhonda and instead either killing Tabitha and the other super mutants, or by just releasing Raul, which will still require the courier to kill Tabitha and the other super mutants on the mountain when they turn hostile. Either way, Raul was saved that day by the courier, and should the courier decide to, Raul would become a companion of the courier and the two would travel together for a time. A bit of a change from the Raul who wanted to be alone forever, but when the courier finds Raul in the Mojave wasteland, imprisoned by the super mutants, he seems to be feeling quite lonely, something very understandable from someone who has been alone for so many years and has experienced so much loss.
Alrighty then, I'll just head out, alone, by myself, into the dangerous waste.
And after beginning to travel with Raul as the player character, we can for the first time truly see the effects of the hard life Raul has had to deal with. Like when he first set out travelling with the courier, he initially refuses to say anything about himself other than his name, and it wouldn't be until the two of them would get to know each other that Raul would begin to open up about his feelings and his dark past. But still, it's still extremely common for Raul to use self-deprecating humour on his travels with the courier.
Cheer up, kid. It's not that bad. Sure, your skin rots off, and you start to stink like a public toilet after Cinco de Mayo. But,
What? How is that not bad? In fact, how could it get worse?
well, assuming you survive the radiation sickness, the lynch mobs, and the possibility of going feral, one day, you'll get old and decrepit, like me.
Oh, God.
What? Was there something I said?
Something that, to me anyway, Raul uses as a mechanism to help his rather dire situation by making some light of it. And it's not only that, but while travelling with Raul, the courier notices how horribly the people of the Mojave wasteland treat Raul, purely on account of him being a ghoul. The only people who seem to tolerate him from what I've seen is the Gomorrah employees, who treat him just like any other gambler. But still, on other areas of the strip, he isn't treated with any real amount of respect, something that I can't imagine doesn't affect Raul, regardless of how quickly he can make a witty comeback, something that definitely must be hard to deal with regardless, as during the events of Fallout New Vegas, Raul is 234 years old, meaning he has had to deal with this level of mistreatment for around 2 centuries. Regardless of all the tough things Raul had been through during his life, it was during his time with the courier that he began to do some serious thinking about his life, just as he had done all those years ago in that old Petro Chico refinery after losing his sister in Mexico City. On his travels with the courier, they met many older people who, even though they were old and their bodies were broken down, they still did what they could to contribute to the world and help people. One of these men was Ranger Andy, although now retired due to injuries to his arm and leg, with the main injury being when he had led a team of rangers on a mission to act upon intel that there were Legion slavers hiding out in a burned out house not far from their station. However, when they arrived, they realised the place was deserted, except for a scrawny child hiding in the closet. When Andy tried to pick him up to take him back to the station, the child hid back in the closet, dropping a live grenade at his feet. Although he survived the explosion, half his body was mangled and he couldn't continue to serve. However, he still stayed a member of the NCR and continued to serve however he could, while still wrestling with feelings of uselessness, something that Raul could deeply identify with and something that really inspired him.
Hey, boss. Can I ask you something? What do you think of guys like Ranger Andy? I mean, guys who have a world of experience doing what they do, but have to give it up because they're getting old and slow or too injured. Maybe, yeah, I guess you got a point there. Not really, boss. No.
Another of these men was Loyal, the chief mechanic for the boomers at Nellis Air Force Base. His chief responsibilities at the base were to keep the solar array and other very important machinery running. After meeting him, Raul again felt inspired about how a man of his age is continuing to give back and help out his people.
That's a good thing to see, huh, boss? That Loyal guy. He's getting up there in years, but he still finds a way to make himself useful to his people. If you ask me, that's better than withering away all alone or holding on to some faded piece of glory from your past. Yeah, that's what I thought too. Old history, boss.
And the final person they would speak to would be Corporal Sterling of the 1st Recon's Alpha Team, stationed at McCarran. Before that, however, he was a distinguished NCR Ranger, giving years of his life to that line of service. It all would eventually come to an end when, during service, he was captured by legionaries near Malpais, who destroyed his hands and feet. But afterwards, they made the mistake of not tying him up, thinking it would be impossible for him to move in such a state. But they were wrong. He managed to escape by crawling on his hands and knees and rolling down an embankment into the Colorado River, hoping to drown himself as opposed to letting Caesar's legion kill him. Thankfully, some Rangers were watching the whole thing unfold and managed to save him before he drowned. But even though he was saved, permanent damage to his hands and feet meant he could no longer serve as an NCR Ranger. It should be mentioned now that the order in which you speak to these 3 people doesn't matter, but after speaking to all of them, Raul feels invigorated and inspired once again to help the people as he had done before.
Got a second to talk, boss? Meeting Corporal Sterling, well, it kinda got me thinking. Here's a guy that's been beat all to hell, right? I mean, he could have retired from the service, but instead he signs back on and does what he can. You think he did the right thing? You think so, boss? Because I remember a time when a lot of people stuck to their duty no matter what. It ended with nuclear bombs falling on my hometown.
And after speaking to each of these 3 men, and thus completing the quest Old School Ghoul, Raul begins to open up to the courier about his life and dark past, and share some of his darkest moments with them. And so, after travelling with the courier for some time, and meeting many of these older people who still do what they can to do what's right, Raul began to think that maybe he does have the strength to take his guns, dust them off, and go back out there and help people as he had done time and time before.
I swore I was done with the gunslinging life. I was too old, too slow, and too beat up to protect anyone anymore. I thought I was done forever, but after traveling with you, I realized I've always had my doubts about whether I still had what it took to carry my pistols proudly, to use them to do what's right. And now that I've been traveling with you for a while, you made me realize that I could still do that. Maybe I'm not as tough as I used to be, but my brains can make up for that, and my hands are still quick enough. It's time to put the guns back on.
He discussed the possibility of going back to being a gunslinger again and helping the helpless people of the Mojave to the courier. There are 2 possible main endings to Raul's story, both of which are hinged on whatever direction the courier decides to push him in. The first one, and my least favourite option, is for the courier to convince Raul that his days as a gunslinger are in the past, and that instead he should focus the rest of his time on being a repairman and to help the people in this way as opposed to being a gunslinger again. To which Raul dons an armoured Petro Chico outfit and continues his life as a repairman, leaving his guns hanging up and instead offering his help in the form of fixing things for the people of the Mojave Wasteland.
Convinced that his time as a gunslinger was past, Raul made peace with the idea of growing old. After traveling with the courier for a time, he retired and settled down in Outer Vegas, where he would spend his days fixing ancient machinery.
The second possible ending for Raul is by far my favourite, and the ending that I consider to be the canon one, regardless of whether or not it is. In this ending, when Raul comes to the courier and tells him about him considering taking up his old vaquero ways again, the courier agrees that it's a great and noble idea, in which case Raul Tajeda, who was once the ghost of Mexico City, once again puts on his vaquero outfit, the first time since his dear Rafaela died all those years ago, and once again, with a renewed sense of vigour, the old but wise vaquero would dedicate his life to helping the downtrodden and exacting revenge on any of those who decide to prey on the weak.
Invigorated by his travels with the courier, Raul once more took up his guns in memory of his lost Rafaela. Soon after, the Mojave was filled with tales of the ghost vaquero who hunts down those who prey on the weak.
But before getting too ahead of ourselves, it should also be mentioned that there are actually 4 possible endings instead of the 2 I have already mentioned. One of these other endings occurs if Raul dies while on his travels with the courier, an ending where Raul never got to see what might become of his future.
After a long and eventful life, Raul's luck finally ran out during his time with the courier.
The other of these 2 alternate endings happens if you free Raul or take him as a companion, but do not complete the quest Old School Ghoul, where he decides what he's going to do for the rest of his life. An ending that for me is the saddest possible ending for Raul, where he must continue his life without the resolution of his past and also without clarity about his future.
Still grappling with self-doubt over his usefulness in the face of old age, Raul was never able to find peace with himself. Eventually, he left the Mojave and assumed a new name, as he had done so many times before.
For me personally, without a doubt, Raul Tajeda is definitely one of my favourite characters in the whole Fallout universe. He's someone that really inspires me through his story, a story where he continues to move ahead in his life no matter what kind of bad luck or outright evil crosses his path, and not only keeps moving forward, but keeps helping people who need help. It would have been very easy for Raul to give up on humanity when those refugees from Mexico City burned down Hidalgo Ranch and killed most of his family, but he still kept his head relatively high and continued to look after his little sister. And again, when those raiders in Mexico City savaged and murdered Rafaela, he could have let his heart run cold and turned his back on humanity. And he did for a while, before arriving in Tucson and meeting Claudia. And once again, like had happened to him many times before, whenever he found someone who meant something to him, someone would rip them away from him. And after going through all that, I wouldn't even blame Raul for giving up on the world and all of the people in it. But again, after meeting the courier, he once again decides to dedicate his life to helping the people who really need it. But this time it was different, as he had come to terms with what had happened to his family at that ranch, and what happened to Rafaela, and what happened to Claudia. And this time, he might face adversity, but he now knows that he's doing it in memory of all the people that he's lost, and for all the people who are in need of help in the wasteland. There's definitely something in Raul's story that truly inspires me to do better and be better, and calls me to help people whenever I can. And I hope with this video, I've inspired you, in even a little way, to keep going and help whoever you can, whenever you can, just as Raul Tajeda has.